It is a truth that societies have long struggled to ignore. Economic inequality is not just an economic issue. It is a biological, political, and moral crisis that threatens the very foundations of human progress. The concentration of wealth in the hands of a few has always shaped the destinies of civilizations, but never before have the consequences been so far-reaching, extending into the realm of genetics, human behavior, and even our evolutionary future. In the 21st century, we are not only witnessing the erosion of democracy at the hands of oligarchs like Trump and Musk, but we are also living through an unprecedented stratification of health, intelligence, and genetic opportunity, one that mirrors the darkest chapters of human history. For many, inequality is merely a political talking point. For others, it is a daily struggle. But few recognize it as an existential threat to our species. The global elite are not merely hoarding wealth, they are shaping human evolution itself. As the billionaire class pours money into genetic enhancement, longevity research, and artificial intelligence, the gap between the rich and the poor is no longer just financial, it is biological. We are rapidly approaching a future where those with wealth will live longer, think faster, and pass those advantages on to their children, while the rest of society deteriorates under economic strain, poor health care, pollution, microplastics, and lead in our bodies, and the lingering effects of generational poverty. If this trend continues, we will not simply see the rich becoming richer, we may witness the emergence of a biologically distinct ruling class. The question is, are we allowing them to create a new Übermensch, a biologically superior elite, while the rest of us struggle against the crushing weight of economic despair? For generations, Western societies have clung to the notion of meritocracy, the belief that intelligence and hard work alone determine success. But this idea ignores a fundamental reality. Economic status is not just an external factor. It burrows into our very biology, shaping the expression of our genes, our health, and our potential. Emerging research in epigenetics, the study of how environmental factors alter gene expression, reveals that poverty leaves scars at the molecular level. Chronic stress, malnutrition, and exposure to pollution do not simply make life harder. They reprogram our genes, increasing the risk of diseases like diabetes, heart disease, and depression. A 2021 study in clinical epigenetics found that socioeconomic status, SES, can become biologically embedded through alterations in DNA methylation, a chemical process that controls which genes are activated or silenced. In simpler terms, poverty is inherited, not just through social structures, but through our very cells. Children born into wealthier families often have better immune function, higher cognitive ability, and longer lifespans, not because of genetic superiority, but because their environment allows them to express their genes optimally. This means that social class is now a selective pressure, influencing not just our success, but our fundamental biology. We do not have to look far to see this process in action. The Netherlands offers a striking case study in how economic conditions can reshape human biology within a few generations. In the early 20th century, the Dutch were among the shortest people in Europe. But after World War II, as their economy stabilized and nutrition improved, they rapidly grew to become the tallest people in the world. Better health care, reduced stress, and improved diet allowed genes associated with height to be fully expressed, demonstrating that biology is not static, it responds to environmental conditions. They're not only, on average, wealthier than we are, they're also healthier and, not surprisingly, happier. This has staggering implications for today's extreme wealth inequality. If economic security can create a physically stronger, healthier population in just a few decades, what happens when the opposite is true? What happens when wealth disparity is allowed to run unchecked, leading to generations of malnourishment, stress, and disease among the working class, while the rich continue to enhance themselves with superior nutrition, medical technology, and genetic engineering? If we allow economic conditions to deteriorate for most, while billionaires engineer ways to prolong their lives and enhance their intelligence, we may witness the beginning of a genetic chasm between the rich and the poor. If history teaches us anything, it is that ideas about human superiority never remain in the realm of theory. Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, a transcendent being who rises above morality and reshapes society in their own image, was not inherently racist. However, it was seized upon by the Nazis to justify eugenics, selective breeding, and mass extermination. The Lebensborn program, spearheaded by Heinrich Himmler, sought to accelerate human evolution by selectively breeding racially pure Germans. This was not just a policy, it was an attempt to create a biologically superior class. Today, billionaires like Musk, Elon, and Bezos are investing heavily in genetic enhancement, longevity research, and cognitive augmentation, not for the masses, but for themselves and their chosen few. The idea that economic elites might deliberately engineer a superior version of themselves is no longer the stuff of dystopian fiction. It is unfolding before our eyes. We must ask, if the ultra-rich can afford to live longer, think faster, and pass those advantages to their children, while the poor suffer from declining life expectancy, are we watching the slow creation of a new master class? At its core, this is not just a scientific or economic issue. It is a human rights emergency. We are taught that freedom and equality are the cornerstones of democracy. But what is democracy when wealth determines who gets to thrive and who gets to wither? Thomas Jefferson warned of the dangers of an aristocracy of wealth. Karl Marx foresaw how capital could dictate the fates of billions. Today, we are facing a far more insidious version of these warnings, one rooted not just in politics, but in our very DNA. Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws. Mayor Amschel Rothschild's words, spoken in the 18th century, ring truer now than ever before. What he could not have foreseen is that in the 21st century, money doesn't just control economies and governments, it controls human biology. It determines who thrives, who survives, and who deteriorates mentally, physically, and even genetically. For centuries, the rich have shaped history, dictating political outcomes and determining the structure of civilization. But today, capitalism is no longer just an economic system, it has become a force of evolution. In a world where extreme wealth inequality dictates access to healthcare, education, and even genetic technology, biological stratification is emerging. The rich are not just richer, they are healthier, longer-lived, and cognitively advantaged, while the poor are biologically ground down by poverty, stress, and environmental hazards. This is not a metaphorical caste system, it is a biological one. In the United States, wealth now determines lifespan itself. The richest Americans live an average of 87 years, while the poorest struggle to reach 72, a disparity of 15 years, greater than the gap between some developed and developing nations. The wealthiest 0.1% of Americans control more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. And that wealth translates into greater access to nutrition, stress reduction, elite education, and the best medical care the world has ever seen. For the first time in history, the ability to manipulate biological aging, intelligence, and cognitive function is emerging as a purchasable commodity, one that is available only to the economic elite. But what about those on the other end of the spectrum? If wealth is now a biological advantage, then poverty is its opposite, a genetically destructive force. The stress of poverty doesn't just affect one's financial security, it changes gene expression, influences brain development, and even impacts the health of future generations. Studies in epigenetics have demonstrated that environmental stressors, from chronic economic anxiety to malnutrition, can alter how genes are expressed. A study published in Clinical Epigenetics found that children born into lower-income households exhibited higher levels of DNA methylation in genes related to stress and inflammation, making them more susceptible to chronic illness, cognitive impairments, and mental health disorders. The biological effects of inequality are not just temporary, they are inheritable. If your grandparents were poor, their suffering may have left an imprint on your DNA, determining your susceptibility to disease and even affecting your ability to cope with stress. In essence, poverty is no longer just an economic disadvantage, it is a biological hazard, one that is being reinforced generation after generation. The effects of economic inequality extend beyond physical health. Wealth determines intelligence. Intelligence is a polygenic trait, influenced by both genetics and environment. However, while many assume intelligence is an inherent, unchangeable quality, science tells a different story. Studies in neuroplasticity have shown that early childhood development, educational resources, and environmental stimulation all contribute significantly to IQ and cognitive ability. Wealthy children have access to elite education, better nutrition, and intellectual enrichment programs that optimize their neural development. Conversely, children raised in poverty are more likely to experience toxic stress, poor nutrition, and underfunded schools, all of which impair cognitive function and lead to lower IQ scores. If these environmental pressures persist across generations, they can become self-reinforcing, locking entire populations into cycles of cognitive stagnation and economic despair. But what happens when intelligence itself becomes a purchasable commodity? Billionaires are already investing in brain-enhancing neural implants, AI-driven cognitive augmentation, and genetic editing technologies designed to enhance intelligence. Elon Musk's Neuralink promises to merge human consciousness with artificial intelligence, creating an intellectual elite that can process information at an unprecedented rate. All of which also raises the question of mind control, as if the richest man in the world, who makes over $2.2 million an hour, or $37,879 per minute. He makes more in a week than some make in a lifetime, every hour, every day. Does he need any more power, let alone Doge? Billionaire Peter Thiel has funded research into genetic enhancement and cognitive optimization, stating that there is no reason why intelligence should not be artificially increased. Meanwhile, China has already begun sequencing millions of newborns to identify genetic markers for intelligence and cognitive potential. If these technologies become accessible only to the wealthy, we may be witnessing the early stages of intelligence stratification, where the rich are not just wealthier, but biologically smarter. This is not the first time humanity has flirted with the idea of engineering an intellectual and physical ruling class. In the early 20th century, the eugenics movement sought to shape human evolution through selective breeding, forced sterilization, and racial pseudoscience. Figures like Henry Ford, John Harvey Kellogg, and Charles Davenport believed that intelligence and morality were inherited, and that society should prevent the unfit from reproducing. The Nazis took these ideas to their extreme, using eugenics as the foundation for the Lebensborn program, which aimed to breed a genetically superior Aryan elite. Today, we may not speak in the language of racial purity, but we are witnessing a new form of eugenics, one driven not by ideology, but by capitalism itself. The future of economic inequality is not just financial, it is biological. If billionaires continue to invest in genetic enhancement, longevity research, and cognitive augmentation, while the poor struggle to access basic health care, education, and nutrition, we may soon find ourselves divided into two separate evolutionary classes. The wealthy will optimize themselves, creating a biological aristocracy, while the poor will inherit a legacy of epigenetic damage, disease, and cognitive stagnation. Natural selection is no longer shaping human evolution. Capitalism is. At its core, this is not just an economic issue. It is a human rights crisis. The fundamental principles of democracy, that all people are created equal, That opportunity should not be determined by birth. That justice should be accessible to all are being systematically dismantled by an economic system that prioritizes profit over human dignity. If we do not act now, we may soon find that wealth inequality has become so deeply embedded in our biology that social mobility is no longer possible. In the 20th century, Soviet geneticists conducted one of the most famous behavioral evolution experiments of all time. In a Siberian laboratory, researchers led by Dmitry Belyaev and Lyudmila Trut selectively bred silver foxes, vulpes, choosing only the tamest individuals for reproduction. Within just a few generations, the foxes not only became docile, but their entire physiology changed. Their ears flopped, their coats developed patches of white, and their skulls became more juvenile. These animals, once wild predators, had been reshaped into something new, artificially selected to be obedient, subservient, and dependent. Though this experiment was intended to study the genetic basis of domestication, it raises an unsettling question when applied to human societies today. Is capitalism performing a similar experiment on us? Have the ruling elites created a system that selects for obedience, suppresses rebellion, and rewards submission? As billionaires tighten their grip over political systems, wealth disparity grows, and social mobility grinds to a halt, we must ask whether extreme inequality is not just a consequence of capitalism, but its intentional design. Darwinian evolution is driven by selection pressures, the environmental forces that determine which traits are passed on to the next generation. In the wild, these pressures might include climate, food availability, or predators. In human societies, selection pressures are different. They are social, political, and economic. They determine who is educated, who is wealthy, and ultimately, who survives and thrives. For much of history, wealth and power have been the ultimate selective forces, shaping not only individual destinies, but entire civilizations. In feudal societies, for example, serfs were bound to landowners, forced into lives of perpetual labor, while an elite ruling class accumulated resources. Over time, the aristocracy became a self-perpetuating class, passing down not just wealth, but access to power, education, and opportunity. Today, we are witnessing a modern version of this feudal system, one where billionaires control not just the economy, but the genetic future of our species. If access to health care, cognitive enhancement, and technological augmentation is limited to the wealthy, then capitalism itself is functioning as an evolutionary gatekeeper. The fox domestication experiment showed that with the right selection pressures, a species could be tamed and biologically altered in just a few generations. Are we seeing a similar phenomenon with economic inequality? Are we being shaped into a more docile, compliant workforce, one that is less likely to rebel against its own subjugation? There is reason to believe this may be the case. Over the past several decades, wages have stagnated while corporate profits have soared. The working class, once a force of labor movements and political resistance, has been pacified by a combination of economic insecurity, social isolation, and media manipulation. The tools of control are no longer just police forces and legal systems, they are psychological and economic. Crushing student debt, precarious employment, and the constant fear of financial ruin create a self-regulating system in which rebellion becomes unthinkable. Capitalism does not need violent suppression to maintain control. It has engineered a reality in which the average person is too exhausted, too indebted, and too atomized to fight back. Just as Belyaev's foxes were bred for submission, modern economic policies breed compliance by ensuring that the working class is too focused on survival to resist. The billionaire class does not need to outlaw revolution. They simply make it logistically impossible. The consequences of this social selection process extend beyond economics. If we reward obedience and punish dissent, what happens to intelligence, creativity, and innovation? Historically, The greatest breakthroughs in science, philosophy, and social progress have come from those who challenged authority. But today's economic system discourages such challenges. Schools prioritize standardized testing over critical thinking. The social contract, once built on the promise of opportunity, is now structured around compliance. If the fox domestication experiment showed us that selection pressures could alter behavior in just a few generations, what might modern economic policies be doing to human behavior right now? If ambition, intelligence, and defiance are traits that become less advantageous for survival in an increasingly rigid class structure, will they begin to fade? Will we become a tamer, more submissive species? There is an even darker possibility. While the working class is selected for obedience, the ruling elite are selecting for intelligence, longevity, and strategic aggression. If billionaires continue to shape the world to their advantage investing in genetic modification, cognitive augmentation, and AI-enhanced intelligence, they will not just be wealthier. They will be biologically superior. This is not science fiction. It is a logical consequence of unequal access to biotechnology. The true danger of wealth inequality is not just that it makes life harder for the poor, it is that it threatens the very concept of democracy. If the wealthy are healthier, smarter, and longer-lived, then they will hold power not just through institutions, but through biological reality. A hereditary ruling class, engineered to be cognitively and physically superior, would make economic mobility a biological impossibility. This is not just a class divide. It is an evolutionary divide. We are already seeing the early signs of this transformation. Billionaires are funding life extension research, brain implants, and genetic enhancements, while the working class fights to afford basic health care. If this trajectory continues, natural selection will be replaced by economic selection, creating a future where those with money are genetically distinct from the rest of humanity. If there is any modern example that proves how economic conditions shape human biology in real time, it is the story of the Dutch. In just over a century, the Netherlands transformed from a country where its people were among the shortest in Europe to the tallest population in the world. This rapid shift was not the result of a sudden genetic mutation, but a clear demonstration that biology responds to economic and social conditions. The Dutch example is more than just an interesting anomaly. It serves as a warning and a lesson. It reveals the extraordinary power of nutrition, healthcare, and economic stability to enhance human potential. But it also raises a deeply troubling question. If prosperity can make us healthier and stronger in just a few generations, what happens when the reverse is true? What happens when economic deprivation becomes the norm for the majority of the population, while only the wealthiest continue to evolve under the best possible conditions? In the early 19th and 20th centuries, the Dutch were shorter than most Europeans. Historical records show that British, German, and Scandinavian populations were taller on average, while Dutch men were often among the shortest recorded in Europe. The reasons were simple: widespread poverty, food scarcity, disease, and economic instability. Then everything changed. Following World War II, the Netherlands underwent an economic and social revolution. The country invested heavily in public health care, social welfare, and a strong agricultural economy that provided abundant, high-quality nutrition. By the late 20th century, the Dutch had overtaken nearly every country in terms of height. Today, the average Dutch man stands at 6 feet, 183 centimeters, while Dutch women average 5 feet 7 inches, 170 centimeters, taller than nearly any other population on Earth. Scientific studies confirm that this rapid change was not genetic but environmental. Research from the Proceedings of the Royal Society B found that Dutch height gains correlated directly with improvements in nutrition, lower infant mortality, and access to health care. In other words, the Dutch grew taller because their economic conditions allowed them to express their full biological potential. This is a powerful demonstration of how even traits that are partially genetic, like height, can be significantly influenced by environmental factors. When people have access to better food, health care, and economic security, their bodies develop more optimally. But if this process works in one direction, it can also work in reverse. If prosperity can shape human biology for the better, then economic deprivation can reshape it for the worse. History provides many chilling examples of how poverty, malnutrition, and social instability have reversed biological progress. During the Irish potato famine, 1845-1852, for example, malnutrition stunted the growth of an entire generation. Historical records suggest that the average height of Irishmen declined during and after the famine, as poor nutrition affected childhood development. Similarly, North Korea provides a modern example of economic stagnation leading to biological decline. Studies comparing North and South Korean populations found that South Koreans are now, on average, several inches taller than their North Korean counterparts. The reason is simple. Food scarcity, malnutrition, and economic hardship in North Korea have stunted the physical development of an entire population. Now, let's apply this to the world today. In the United States, we are beginning to see the first signs of biological decline among the working class. For the first time in modern history, American life expectancy has begun to decrease. Studies have found that rates of childhood malnutrition are increasing, while access to health care is declining. Income inequality has created an environment in which only the wealthy can afford optimal nutrition, medical treatments, and stress-free living conditions. If this trend continues, we may begin to see the reverse of what happened in the Netherlands, a population growing biologically weaker, sicker, and less resilient due to systemic deprivation. What makes this crisis even more disturbing is that the ultra-rich are actively engineering their own biological future. While working-class populations struggle with declining health, shorter lifespans, and increasing genetic risks, billionaires are investing in longevity research, genetic enhancement, and AI-driven health optimization. Peter Thiel, for example, has openly discussed his belief that aging is a disease that can be cured. He has invested in companies that are exploring genetic modifications to extend human lifespan research that will undoubtedly be available only to the wealthy. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos has poured millions into Altos Labs, a biotech company working on cellular rejuvenation therapy. Elon Musk's Neuralink aims to merge human intelligence with AI, potentially creating a new cognitive elite. In short, while the majority of humanity faces worsening health and economic decline, the billionaire class is actively future-proofing its self-enhancing longevity, intelligence, and biological resilience. This brings us to the real danger of unchecked wealth inequality. It is not just that billionaires hoard resources, but that they are designing a future in which they are biologically distinct from the rest of us. If we continue down this path, we may soon find ourselves in a world where the wealthy are taller, healthier, and longer-lived, while the working class is left to biologically regress. The Netherlands' success story was not accidental. The Dutch government made deliberate policy decisions that improved public health and prioritized social well-being over corporate profits. Their example shows that inequality is not an inevitable reality, it is a choice. We are at a tipping point. We can either fight for economic and biological equality, ensuring that all people, regardless of income, have access to optimal health and well-being, or we can allow the billionaire class to hijack human evolution. The Dutch became the tallest people in the world because they invested in social stability, health, and shared prosperity. If we do not follow this model, we risk moving in the opposite direction toward a future where inequality is permanently etched into our very biology. Throughout history, the powerful have sought to justify their control by claiming they were biologically superior to those they ruled. Whether through aristocratic bloodlines, racial pseudoscience, or class-based hierarchies, the ruling elite has repeatedly manufactured narratives that position their privilege as a natural outcome rather than a social construct. Perhaps nowhere was this ideology more destructive than in the eugenics movement of the 19th and 20th centuries, which sought to engineer humanity by controlling who could reproduce, who was deemed fit, and who was marked for elimination. Though many assume eugenics ended with the fall of Nazi Germany, the reality is far more disturbing. The billionaires of today are reviving the same principles under a new guise: genetic enhancement, longevity research, and selective reproduction designed to benefit only the elite. What the Nazis attempted with pseudoscience and state violence, modern capitalists are achieving through wealth, technology, and privatized control over human evolution. The term eugenics was first coined in the late 19th century by Francis Galton, a British scientist and cousin of Charles Darwin. Galton believed that intelligence and moral character were inherited traits, and that society should actively encourage the reproduction of the fittest, while discouraging or even preventing those deemed unfit from passing on their genes. His ideas quickly gained traction among the elites of Europe and the United States, who saw eugenics as a scientific justification for existing social hierarchies. By the early 20th century, eugenics was embraced by American policymakers, industrialists, and academics. Figures like Henry Ford, John Harvey Kellogg, and Charles Davenport promoted the belief that certain races and classes were biologically inferior. Laws were passed to forcibly sterilize thousands of people, primarily poor women, disabled individuals, and people of color, under the guise of public health. The Supreme Court even upheld forced sterilization in the infamous 1927 case Buck v. Bell, where Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes declared 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. These ideas directly influenced Nazi Germany. When Hitler came to power in 1933, he praised American eugenic policies, stating that Germany must take similar steps to purify its population. The Nazis' racial hygiene programs escalated into mass sterilization, euthanasia programs, and eventually the Holocaust, where millions were murdered in pursuit of a so-called master race. Though the world recoiled in horror after World War II, the core ideology of biological hierarchy did not disappear. Instead, it evolved repackaged into more palatable forms, from IQ-based immigration policies to the myth of genetic determinism in intelligence and success. Today, we are witnessing the resurgence of these ideas, not through government decree, but through corporate and billionaire-led initiatives to reshape human genetics for profit and power. One of Nazi Germany's most infamous experiments in human breeding was the Lebensborn program, launched by Heinrich Himmler in 1935. The goal was chillingly simple: to engineer a biologically superior race of Aryan children. The program encouraged SS officers to father children with women who fit Nazi racial ideals, while systematically kidnapping thousands of racially pure children from occupied territories to be Germanized. Those who failed to meet Nazi standards were sent to extermination camps. Lebensborn was not just about race, it was about control. It was the belief that a ruling elite had the right to dictate human evolution. While the horrors of Lebensborn ended with the fall of the Third Reich, its ideological foundation, that the powerful have the right to engineer the human future, has not only survived, but is thriving among today's billionaire class. Today, the idea of selectively engineering superior humans is no longer a state-run program. It is a private industry. Billionaires are investing billions into genetic research, not to cure disease for the masses, but to enhance themselves. They are funding projects that could allow the rich to extend their lives, increase their intelligence, and manipulate their genetic legacy while leaving everyone else behind. Elon Musk, for example, has openly speculated about the potential for genius babies created through genetic selection. Peter Thiel has invested in biotechnology firms researching longevity treatments, effectively attempting to escape natural aging. Jeff Bezos has poured millions into Altos Labs, a company focused on cellular rejuvenation therapy. None of these initiatives are aimed at democratizing health and human potential. They are meant to give the elite a permanent biological advantage. This is not science fiction. It is the beginning of a biological caste system. If only the wealthiest individuals have access to genetic optimization, cognitive enhancement, and life extension technology, they will become not just the ruling class, but an entirely separate biological class. We are no longer talking about mere economic inequality. We are talking about a future where the rich become a new species, longer-lived, more intelligent, and physically superior, while the rest of humanity is left behind to suffer the consequences of poverty, stress, and genetic stagnation. Eugenics has always adapted to fit the dominant ideology of its time. In the early 20th century, it was racial superiority. Today, it is economic superiority. The same billionaires funding genetic enhancement are also actively working to dismantle social programs, weaken labor rights, and defund public health care and education. Their goal is clear: to ensure that the benefits of modern science and technology are reserved for those who can afford them, while the rest of the population is forced into economic and biological servitude. If left unchecked, this new form of eugenics will create a world where meritocracy is a lie, where opportunity is an illusion, and where the rich do not just rule, but biologically transcend the rest of us. Eugenics never truly died, it simply rebranded. Once a state-driven effort to control human reproduction through forced sterilization and racial purity laws, the new eugenics is privatized, technocratic, and controlled not by governments, but by billionaires. Instead of sterilization programs, we now have genetic editing. Instead of Lebensborn-style breeding programs, we have embryo selection and artificial wombs. And instead of state-imposed euthanasia, we have a future where the rich can prolong their lives indefinitely while the poor struggle to survive. The ultra-wealthy are not just using their money to shape politics and the economy. They are using it to reshape the human species itself. By pouring billions into genetic enhancement, artificial intelligence, and life extension research, billionaires are attempting to engineer themselves into a separate, superior Class 1 that is not just wealthier, but biologically distinct from the rest of us. For most of human history, reproduction was left to chance. But today, billionaires are investing in gene-editing technologies like CRISPR, embryonic screening, and artificial wombs to ensure that their offspring are stronger, healthier, and more intelligent than the average person. The use of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis already allows wealthy parents to select embryos based on desired traits, ensuring their children have higher IQs, resistance to disease, and even preferred physical characteristics. Companies like Genomic Prediction offer embryo screening for intelligence, allowing parents to select embryos with genetic markers linked to higher cognitive function. While currently marketed as a way to prevent genetic disorders, it is only a matter of time before the wealthy use this technology to create a new ruling Class 1 that is engineered for dominance. This is no longer speculation. China has already begun large-scale genome sequencing of millions of newborns to identify genetic markers for intelligence and disease resistance. Meanwhile, Silicon Valley venture capitalists are pouring money into biotech startups that promise to enhance human cognition and lifespan. If only the rich can afford to genetically optimize their children, then natural selection will be replaced by economic selection. Intelligence, health, and longevity will become privileges of birth, not random genetic inheritance. This is how biological caste systems begin. The same billionaires investing in genetic enhancement are also leading the charge in AI development. While they claim artificial intelligence will benefit humanity, the reality is far more dystopian. AI is being designed to enhance the ruling class while replacing the working class. Elon Musk's Neuralink is marketed as a revolutionary brain-computer interface that will allow humans to integrate with AI. But who will have access to this technology? Will the average worker be able to afford cognitive enhancement? Or will it be a luxury reserved for the ultra-wealthy? If billionaires can augment their intelligence through AI integration, while the rest of humanity remains biologically limited, then we are entering a future where the ruling class is no longer just financially dominant. They will be intellectually and cognitively superior. At the same time, artificial intelligence is being used to replace human labor at an unprecedented rate. Musk, Bezos, and other tech moguls have aggressively pushed for automation in manufacturing, transportation, and even white-collar jobs. The result? A permanently unemployed underclass that is economically obsolete. As AI takes over more industries, those who do not have access to cognitive enhancement or AI integration will be left behind. We must ask, is AI being developed to liberate humanity, or to create an unbridgeable intelligence gap between the rich and the poor? For most of history, death was the great equalizer. No matter how rich or powerful someone was, they eventually died. But today's billionaires are spending billions to change that. Companies like Altos Labs, backed by Jeff Bezos, are focused on cellular rejuvenation and life extension technology. Meanwhile, Peter Thiel has invested in parabiosis experiments infusions of young blood plasma to slow aging. What happens when the ruling class no longer dies? If the ultra-rich can extend their lifespans indefinitely, they will amass even greater economic and political power. Democracy, already fragile, will collapse entirely as society becomes a gerontocracy, ruled by a class of immortal elites who own everything. If we allow a small group of billionaires to monopolize life extension technologies, we will be entering a world where power is never transferred, where the wealthy never step aside, and where the rest of us live shorter, sicker lives in comparison. The balance of human society will be forever broken. The combination of genetic engineering, AI-driven intelligence augmentation, and billionaire-funded life extension research is leading us toward a neo-feudal future, where the rich are biologically optimized and the poor are rendered irrelevant. This is not just a political or economic crisis. It is an existential one. It is a future. We must resist. We are witnessing the beginning of a controlled evolutionary split, where those with money are evolving into something beyond human, while the rest of us remain stuck in a deteriorating biological and economic reality. The idea that some people are destined to rule while others exist to serve is one of the oldest justifications for inequality. Throughout history, empires, aristocracies, and ruling classes have used pseudoscientific justifications for their dominance, ranging from the divine right of kings to the eugenics movements of the 19th and 20th centuries. But if there is a single doctrine that encapsulates how power, race, and economic inequality were deliberately structured into human society, it is the doctrine of discovery, a 15th-century religious and legal framework that provided the justification for European conquest, slavery, and colonization. Though most people today have never heard of it, the doctrine of discovery is the foundation of global racial and economic hierarchies that persist to this day. It declared that any land not ruled by Christians was empty and could be claimed by European powers. This was more than a policy, it was a blueprint for systemic domination, creating a world in which wealth, power, and even human worth were determined by race and lineage. Today, that same ideology is alive and well. Only now, it has been repackaged into the language of capitalism, technology, and economic superiority. The billionaire class is not just accumulating wealth, they are re-establishing a new form of colonization, one that no longer conquers land, but controls human potential itself. The doctrine of discovery originated in a series of papal bulls issued in the 15th century. These decrees, issued by the Catholic Church, gave European nations the legal and moral justification to claim any land inhabited by non-Christians. The most infamous of these, the 1493 bull Inter Caetera, issued by Pope Alexander VI, declared that all land discovered by European explorers belonged to the Catholic monarchs of Spain and Portugal, effectively erasing the sovereignty of indigenous peoples. This doctrine became the foundation of European colonialism, justifying the transatlantic slave trade, the genocide of indigenous peoples in the Americas, Australia, and Africa, and the exploitation of resources and people across the global South, ensuring that wealth flowed only to European powers. But what many do not realize is that the doctrine of discovery was never repealed. It is still embedded in modern law. In 1823, the U.S. Supreme Court, in the case Johnson v. Mintosh, ruled that the doctrine of discovery gave the U.S. government the right to seize indigenous lands. That ruling remains legally binding today, forming the basis of property law and land disputes across North America. In other words, the world's wealthiest nations are still built on a legal framework that declares non-white people as subordinate to European economic interests. This is not history, this is the present. Though European empires no longer control vast territories through direct rule, colonialism never truly ended. It simply evolved into economic imperialism. The same forces that stole land and labor centuries ago are now using financial systems, corporate monopolies, and globalization to continue exploiting the world's poorest populations. International financial institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund force developing nations into crippling debt, ensuring they remain economically dependent on Western powers. Multinational corporations extract resources from Africa, South America, and Asia while paying workers poverty wages, mirroring colonial-era resource exploitation. Billionaires like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates are buying up land, water, and food supplies, controlling not just wealth, but human survival itself. In many ways, the billionaire class has taken the place of old colonial empires. They do not need armies, they have banks, hedge funds, and corporate monopolies. And just as European powers used racist ideology to justify their exploitation, today's economic elites justify their power through the myth of meritocracy. They claim that their wealth is the result of their intelligence and hard work, when in reality, they are simply the latest beneficiaries of centuries of structured inequality. Race was always a tool of economic control. The categorization of people into racial groups was never based on science. It was created to justify economic exploitation. During the height of European imperialism, race became a convenient way to assign social and economic status. Black Africans were enslaved, indigenous peoples were displaced, and Irish and Asian laborers were relegated to second-class status, all under the guise of racial superiority. But today, as genetic science increasingly reveals that race is a social construct, not a biological reality, the ruling class has begun shifting its justification for inequality. The new divide is not just racial, it is economic and genetic. The billionaires of today are using genetics, AI, and bioengineering to create a permanent, unchallengeable ruling class. We are seeing a transition from a racial hierarchy to an economic caste system, one that is reinforced by technology rather than skin color. Who gets access to life extension treatments? The wealthy. Who gets access to genetically optimized children? The wealthy. Who gets access to cognitive augmentation? The wealthy. Just as European aristocracies once claimed divine right, and just as eugenicists claimed racial superiority, today's billionaires claim economic and genetic superiority. They are not just controlling wealth, they are controlling who gets to evolve and who gets left behind. If we do not act now, we will soon find ourselves in a neo-feudal world, where a small genetic elite rules over a biologically inferior underclass. This is why I wrote the Universal Declaration on Equality, Human Rights, and Justice. Because economic equality is not just about wealth. It is about human dignity, human evolution, and the survival of democracy itself. The billionaire class is following the same path that European empires followed centuries ago. Only this time, they are not just conquering land. They are conquering the future of human existence. We must recognize economic inequality as the modern equivalent of colonialism and fight to ensure that the benefits of genetic, technological, and medical advancements are available to all, not just a privileged few. In the next section, we will explore how modern genetics disproves the concept of race, yet race remains a tool of economic and social control. We will examine how human DNA is 99.9% identical across all populations, why race was invented as a justification for economic inequality, and how modern policies continue to reinforce racial divisions despite scientific evidence that race is meaningless. If we do not dismantle the myths that justify inequality, we will continue to repeat history, only this time the consequences will be biological and irreversible. For centuries, societies have treated race as an immutable biological truth, a natural divide that separates human beings into distinct groups with inherent differences in intelligence, ability, and worth. Yet modern genetics has dismantled this illusion, proving that race is not a biological reality, but a social construct, created to justify economic exploitation, colonization, and inequality. The genetic differences between so-called racial groups are insignificant, and all humans share 99.9% of their DNA. And yet, despite this overwhelming scientific consensus, race remains a powerful tool of division, shaping economic hierarchies, political policies, and social structures. Why? Because race was never about science, it was always about power. The idea of racial categorization was invented to serve a purpose: to justify economic exploitation. European powers, in their conquest of the world, needed a rationale for enslaving, displacing, and exploiting entire populations. If they could convince themselves and others that non-Europeans were biologically inferior, then the enslavement of Africans, the extermination of indigenous peoples, and the economic subjugation of colonized nations could be framed not as crimes, but as the natural order of things. This was the foundation of scientific racism, a false ideology that emerged in the 18th and 19th centuries and was used to uphold slavery, segregation, apartheid, and eugenics. But the scientific reality tells a very different story. All human beings, regardless of skin color, share nearly identical genetic material. Studies of the human genome have shown that there is more genetic diversity within so-called racial groups than between them. In other words, two people from different racial backgrounds are likely to be more genetically similar than two people from the same racial group. The physical traits we associate with race, skin color, hair texture, facial features, are shaped by a handful of genes, influenced by geography and environmental adaptation, not by deep evolutionary divergence. The superficiality of these differences makes race a weak, arbitrary system for categorizing people, yet it remains one of the most enduring justifications for inequality. Despite overwhelming evidence that race is biologically meaningless, society still treats it as if it were real. The consequences of this false construct are devastating. Economic disparities, educational inequalities, healthcare access, and legal discrimination are all structured along racial lines. People of color are disproportionately targeted by policing and incarceration, experience worse health outcomes, and have lower generational wealth compared to white populations. These disparities do not exist because of genetic differences. They exist because of centuries of deliberate policies designed to enforce racial hierarchies. Even though race is not real in a biological sense, it has very real effects on people's lives. This contradiction, where race is both a myth and a lived reality, demonstrates the power of social constructs. Money, borders, and laws are also social constructs, but they shape the world in tangible ways. Race functions the same way. It is an idea, a fiction invented for political and economic purposes, yet it dictates who has access to resources, opportunities, and even survival itself. If race was created to enforce inequality, then we must ask, who benefits from its continued existence? The billionaire class has found new ways to exploit racial divisions, using them as a tool to prevent economic solidarity among the poor and working class. While genetic science has debunked the biological basis of race, corporate and political elites continue to stoke racial tensions, ensuring that marginalized groups fight among themselves rather than unite against their true oppressors. The ruling class thrives on division. If the poor black, white, indigenous, immigrant were to see past the illusion of racial difference and recognize their shared economic struggle, they could dismantle the system that keeps them in perpetual servitude. This is why history is filled with examples of ruling elites using racial fear to suppress class solidarity. In the United States, after Bacon's Rebellion in 1676, where black and white indentured servants united against their colonial masters, new laws were passed that legally divided poor whites from enslaved blacks, ensuring that such alliances could never form again. This strategy continues today in the form of racial scapegoating, nationalist propaganda, and the criminalization of racial justice movements. We are now witnessing a new chapter in this age-old strategy. As economic inequality reaches catastrophic levels, billionaires and political elites are reviving race-based narratives to maintain control. The push against diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI programs, the rollback of affirmative action, and the attacks on critical race theory are not about fairness or meritocracy. They are about preserving economic and racial hierarchies. By convincing struggling white Americans that their true enemies are immigrants, black activists, or affirmative action recipients, the ruling class ensures that their attention is directed away from the real source of their suffering. A rigged economic system designed to benefit only the ultra-rich. At the same time, billionaires are moving beyond racial hierarchies and towards something even more insidious, a genetic hierarchy. The old racial caste system may be breaking down, but it is being replaced with an even more unchallengeable form of inequality, one based not on skin color, but on biological enhancements available only to the wealthy. If genetic modification, intelligence augmentation, and life extension treatments are restricted to the elite, a new class divide will emerge, one where wealth determines not just social status, but physical and cognitive superiority. The very concept of race may eventually fade, but in its place, we will see the rise of a biological aristocracy, engineered to rule over an economically and genetically stagnant underclass. This is why I wrote the Universal Declaration on Equality, Human Rights, and Justice. We must recognize that economic inequality is the new frontier of oppression, surpassing race as the primary mechanism of human division. The struggle for racial justice cannot be separated from the fight for economic justice, because both are rooted in the same fundamental truth. All human beings are equal, and any system that seeks to rank or categorize us is a threat to our collective dignity. Science has exposed race as a lie. Now, it is time for society to catch up. In the next section, we will examine how billionaires are shaping human evolution through AI, genetic enhancement, and biological augmentation. We will explore why economic privilege is no longer just about power, but about who gets to evolve and who is left behind. If we do not recognize wealth inequality as an existential threat, we may soon find ourselves in a world where the rich are not just wealthier, but a fundamentally different species. The world's wealthiest individuals are no longer satisfied with economic dominance alone. They are not just buying influence over governments, controlling global resources, and dictating labor conditions. They are investing in the next stage of human evolution, ensuring that they and their descendants remain the ruling class forever. In past centuries, aristocracies justified their power through divine right, racial superiority, or sheer military strength. Today, billionaires are using technology, biotechnology, and artificial intelligence to manufacture an irreversible biological hierarchy, one where wealth determines not just privilege, but physical and cognitive superiority. For centuries, evolution was shaped by natural selection, But in the 21st century, natural selection is being replaced by economic selection. The ultra-rich are using their wealth to prolong their lives, enhance their intelligence, and optimize their genetics, while the rest of humanity is left behind to face increasing poverty, declining health care, and a collapsing environment. This is not just inequality. It is the foundation of a genetic caste system, a world in which the wealthy are engineered to be superior, while the poor are biologically disadvantaged by design. The early signs of this transformation are already visible. The rise of gene-editing technologies like CRISPR, the increasing power of AI-driven cognitive augmentation, and the billions being poured into life extension research all point to one terrifying reality. The billionaires of today are laying the groundwork for a future where they will no longer be just the wealthiest class, but an entirely different species. One of the most significant threats to equality is the growing ability to manipulate human genetics, an ability that, like everything else, will be controlled by those with money. CRISPR and other gene-editing technologies now allow for the precise modification of human embryos, raising the possibility of designer babies engineered for superior intelligence, physical strength, and disease resistance. Wealthy individuals are already investing in companies that promise genetic selection and embryo screening to optimize future generations. Firms like Genomic Prediction offer genetic testing services that claim to identify embryos with the highest potential for intelligence and long life. These services, once experimental, are quickly becoming mainstream, but only for those who can afford them. If billionaires have access to genetic enhancements for their children, while the rest of the world is left with natural selection and declining healthcare access, we are witnessing the birth of a new aristocracy, one that is not just richer, but biologically superior. China has already begun large-scale genetic sequencing of newborns to identify high-potential individuals, and private companies in the US and Europe are investing in genetic intelligence research. The next step is clear. If intelligence and cognitive abilities can be enhanced through genetics, the wealthy will ensure that only their children benefit. Beyond genetics, billionaires are also investing in artificial intelligence as a tool for cognitive enhancement. While most of the world worries about AI taking their jobs, the wealthy see it as a tool to make themselves even more powerful. Elon Musk's Neuralink, a brain-computer interface designed to merge human consciousness with AI, is a clear example of this trend. While Musk markets Neuralink as a potential treatment for neurological diseases, its true implications are far greater. It could create a world where those who can afford neural implants are literally able to think faster, process more information, and outperform everyone else. Imagine a future where the wealthiest individuals are not just smarter through education and privilege, but through direct technological augmentation. A world where AI-enhanced billionaires control politics, finance, and innovation, while the rest of humanity is left struggling to keep up. This is the future that billionaires are building. A future where intelligence itself is a commodity, available only to those who can pay for it. The consequences of this divide will be catastrophic. If intelligence can be bought, it will no longer be possible to challenge the ruling class. The world will not just be divided by wealth, but by cognitive capacity. Democracy cannot function in a world where one class of people is so intellectually superior that the rest are powerless to challenge them. If we do not fight to democratize access to AI-enhanced intelligence, we are heading toward a society where the rich will not just rule, but be fundamentally beyond competition. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the billionaire plan for evolution is their obsession with immortality. Historically, power was always temporary. Leaders died, new generations emerged, and change was inevitable. But today's billionaires are determined to break this cycle, ensuring that they never have to relinquish control. Companies like Altos Labs, backed by Jeff Bezos, are investing billions into cellular rejuvenation and life extension therapies. Peter Thiel has openly discussed his belief that aging is a disease that can be cured. Wealthy individuals are undergoing experimental medical treatments, using everything from stem cell infusions to parabiosis, young blood transfusions, in an attempt to prolong their lives. If these technologies succeed, they will not be available to the average person. Only the rich will have access to radical life extension, meaning the same billionaires who control the world today could still be in power 200 years from now. The implications of this are staggering. If the wealthy no longer die, social mobility will become impossible. Today, power transitions through death and generational change, but a world where billionaires live indefinitely would mean a permanent ruling class, one that never ages, never steps aside, and never relinquishes control. The rich would continue accumulating wealth and influence, while the rest of humanity remains stuck in economic struggle, unable to break into a system controlled by an immortal elite. The billionaire class is not just reshaping society, they are reshaping the future of humanity itself. The combination of genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and life extension technologies is leading us toward a new evolutionary split, one where the rich are not just wealthier, but fundamentally superior. This is not just an economic issue, it is an existential threat. If we do not fight for universal access to genetic medicine, AI integration, and life extension technology, we are condemning ourselves to a future where the ruling class is literally untouchable. In the next section, we will examine the ethical implications of technological evolution and explore the philosophical and moral dilemmas posed by a world where some humans are genetically and cognitively enhanced, while others are left behind. If we do not confront these questions now, the answers will be decided for us by those who can afford to shape the future in their image. The rapid advancements in genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and longevity research raise profound ethical and philosophical questions. If these technologies can enhance human intelligence, physical ability, and lifespan, who should have access to them? Should they be treated as a public good, available to all, or as a commodity reserved for those who can afford them? The answer to these questions will shape the future of humanity, determining whether we remain a society of equals or descend into a biological caste system where the wealthy are not just richer, but fundamentally different from the rest of us. Throughout history, technological advancements have been double-edged swords capable of liberation and oppression, progress and control. The printing press democratized knowledge, but it was also used to spread propaganda. Industrialization created economic prosperity, but it also led to worker exploitation and environmental destruction. Today, as we stand on the brink of human augmentation, artificial intelligence, and genetic modification, we must ask ourselves, will these technologies be tools for equality or weapons for the ruling class? One of the most fundamental ethical questions in human augmentation is whether people should have the right to enhance themselves beyond natural human limitations. If genetic engineering can make people smarter, stronger, and live longer, should we embrace it as a natural extension of human progress? Or should we be wary of the consequences, knowing that such enhancements could create a permanent divide between those who can afford them and those who cannot? Philosophers have debated the nature of human perfection for centuries. Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch envisioned a future where humans transcended their limitations, creating a superior form of existence. But history has shown how easily such ideas can be twisted. The Nazis took Nietzsche's vision and corrupted it into a justification for racial supremacy, leading to the horrors of the Lebensborn program and eugenics-based genocide. Today, billionaires are pursuing a new kind of Übermensch, not one defined by race, but by wealth. If genetic enhancement and AI augmentation remain the exclusive domain of the rich, they will serve as a new justification for oppression. Just as past elites argued that their privilege was the result of divine favor or racial superiority, the ruling class of the future will argue that they deserve to rule because they are literally smarter, stronger, and longer lived than the rest of us. This is the great ethical dilemma of our time. If we allow genetic and technological enhancement to be monopolized by the wealthy, we will create an unbreakable hierarchy where power is biologically determined. Meritocracy. The belief that success is based on talent and effort is one of the most powerful myths of modern society. In reality, meritocracy has always been a rigged game, where wealth and privilege provide unfair advantages. But in a world where the rich can enhance their intelligence, cognitive processing speed, and lifespan, the illusion of meritocracy will vanish completely. Imagine two children, one born into a wealthy family that can afford genetic enhancement, neural implants, and AI-assisted learning, and another born into poverty, with no access to such advancements. The enhanced child will have a permanent, insurmountable advantage over the other. No amount of hard work or natural intelligence will allow the unenhanced child to compete. In such a world, social mobility will be dead. The ruling class will no longer need laws or political structures to maintain their dominance. Their biological superiority will ensure their control. The consequences of this divide are staggering. If the wealthy can enhance themselves generation after generation, they will become a separate, superior species, while the poor will be locked into permanent biological inferiority. What we are witnessing is not just economic inequality, it is the beginning of a genetic and cognitive divergence that could end the very idea of human equality. Beyond genetic enhancement, artificial intelligence is also being weaponized to deepen economic and social divides. While billionaires use AI to enhance their own cognitive abilities and financial power, they are also using it to automate industries, eliminate jobs, and push workers into permanent economic insecurity. The rise of automation and AI-driven decision-making is not making life easier for ordinary people. It is making them redundant. Self-checkout kiosks, warehouse robots, and algorithmic management systems are replacing millions of jobs, while AI-driven surveillance and policing disproportionately target marginalized communities. The same technology that could be used to liberate humanity from menial labor is instead being used to increase profits, lower wages, and cement economic stratification. At the same time, billionaires are investing in AI-driven cognitive augmentation to enhance their own intelligence. The fight for economic equality is no longer just about wages and wealth distribution, it is about who gets to evolve and who is left behind. If we do not demand that genetic medicine, AI augmentation, and life extension technology are accessible to all, we will soon find ourselves in a world where the rich are not just wealthier, but biologically superior. The future must not be shaped by profit-driven enhancement for the few, while the many are left to struggle with economic and biological obsolescence. We have an ethical obligation to ensure that advancements in human potential are accessible to all, not just the wealthy elite. If we fail, we will be creating a new form of apartheid, one not based on race, but on biology itself. In the next section, we will explore what steps must be taken to prevent this dystopian future, and ensure that technological and genetic advancements serve humanity as a whole. We will examine the policies, social movements, and ethical frameworks that can protect democracy, preserve human dignity, and prevent the rise of a new genetic aristocracy. If we do not act now, the future will be decided for us by those who see the rest of humanity as obsolete. We are standing at a crossroads in human history. For the first time, wealth is not just determining social status and economic power, it is determining who gets to evolve. The ultra-rich are positioning themselves as the architects of the future, using biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and life extension research to create a biologically superior ruling class. If we do not act, we will witness the birth of a genetic aristocracy, one where the rich are engineered to be smarter, stronger, and longer-lived, while the rest of humanity is left behind to struggle in an obsolete biological state. This is not just a political crisis, it is an existential one. The billionaire class is taking the last remnants of democracy, social mobility, and human equality, and replacing them with an unchallengeable system of biological dominance. But it is not too late to fight back. We still have the power to prevent this dystopian future and reclaim the promise of human equality. The question is, do we have the will to do it? Reversing the course of this engineered inequality requires action on multiple levels: scientific, political, economic, and cultural. If we are to prevent billionaires from monopolizing human advancement, we must demand radical reforms that ensure biotechnology, AI, and medical advancements are used for collective good rather than private gain. The first and most urgent step is to treat genetic and cognitive enhancements as a public good, not a commodity. Just as healthcare, education, and clean water should be rights, so too must access to life-extending and intelligence-enhancing technologies. We cannot allow a small group of billionaires to decide who gets to be enhanced and who remains biologically limited. Governments must implement strict regulations and ethical oversight to prevent genetic modification and AI-enhanced intelligence from being restricted to the ultra-wealthy. If genetic enhancements are to be developed, they must be made universally available, or they must not be allowed at all. At the same time, we must aggressively combat the economic policies that fuel this growing divide. The billionaire class is using AI to replace workers, automation to drive down wages, and monopolistic capitalism to keep wealth in the hands of the few. If we do not address wealth inequality as a core issue, any progress we make on technological ethics will be meaningless. Economic democracy, which includes stronger labor rights, universal basic income, and wealth redistribution, must become a priority. We cannot allow a system where billionaires extract resources from the working class, while using those profits to build an enhanced version of themselves. Governments around the world must recognize that this is no longer just a debate about inequality. It is a debate about survival. Policies must be implemented that ban the privatization of life extension technologies and ensure they are available to all, regulate genetic modification to prevent its use as a tool for economic and biological class separation, ensure that AI-driven cognitive enhancements are accessible to all citizens, not just the elite, and break up monopolies and redistribute wealth, ensuring that technological progress benefits all of humanity, not just a handful of billionaires. If governments fail to act, then resistance will not just be necessary, it will be inevitable. If democracy cannot contain the unchecked power of billionaires, then democracy itself must evolve. Revolution has always been the historical response to economic oppression, but what happens when the oppressors are no longer just financially powerful, but biologically superior? What happens when those in control are not just the wealthiest, but the longest living, the most intelligent, and the most physically optimized? This is why we cannot wait. We must act now, while the gap is still closable, before the billionaire class achieves irreversible superiority. The battle is not just for economic justice. It is for the future of human evolution itself. One of the greatest weapons the ruling class has ever wielded is the myth of their own superiority. We have been conditioned to believe that billionaires deserve their wealth because they are smarter, harder working, and more innovative than the rest of us. This is a lie. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Peter Thiel are not self-made geniuses. They are exploiters who have used inherited wealth, government contracts, and monopolistic control to amass power. The idea that these men should be entrusted with shaping the future of humanity is as absurd as trusting medieval kings to determine the fate of their peasants. The billionaire class does not seek to uplift humanity. They seek to transcend it. They do not want to end suffering. They want to ensure that they alone escape it. While they pour billions into AI-enhanced intelligence, they cut funding for public education. While they invest in genetic optimization, they fight against universal health care. Their goal is not to bring humanity forward as a whole. It is to create a new, enhanced ruling class that is untouchable by ordinary people. If we are to resist, we must destroy the illusion that billionaires are our saviors. We must reject the narrative that technological progress belongs to the wealthy. The future must belong to all of us, or none of us. The fight for economic and technological equality is a global one. Just as workers once united to demand fair wages and civil rights activists fought for racial justice, we must now come together to demand fairness in the future of human evolution. This is not a battle for one nation, one party, or one ideology. It is a battle for the very nature of what it means to be human. The solution begins with education, awareness, and collective action. We must ensure that the public understands the dangers of technological inequality and genetic elitism, demand that governments regulate these advancements to prevent a permanent biological class divide, and recognize that economic and technological justice are inseparable. If we do not act now, we risk a future where economic inequality is no longer just a matter of wealth, but a permanent biological divide. The ultra-rich are on the verge of securing exclusive access to genetic enhancements, AI integration, and life extension technologies, creating a world where they are not just wealthier, but fundamentally superior. This is not just an economic issue, it is an existential threat to human rights, democracy, and the very nature of what it means to be human. If we fail to ensure equal access to these advancements, we will condemn the majority of humanity to a life of genetic and economic subjugation, trapped in a hereditary caste system where social mobility is biologically impossible. Economic justice is not just about wages and taxation, it is about defending human evolution from being hijacked by a billionaire elite. The right to health, intelligence, and longevity must belong to all, not just those who can afford them. That is why I wrote the Universal Declaration on Equality, Human Rights, and Justice, to recognize economic equity as a fundamental human right and to fight for a future where progress benefits all of humanity, not just a privileged few. The final battle of inequality is here. This is not just about capitalism or socialism, left or right. This is about ensuring that human progress remains collective rather than exclusive. If we do not take action, the decision will be made for us by those who do not see the rest of us as equals, but as evolutionary dead ends. We have reached the moment where we must decide, will the future belong to all of us, or only to those who can afford to buy it? Will human progress be shared, or will it be hoarded? If we do nothing, we will witness the rise of a genetic aristocracy, an AI-enhanced ruling class that we will never be able to challenge. But if we fight, if we demand that the benefits of human advancement belong to everyone, we can still shape the future into one where all people, regardless of wealth, have the right to thrive. We have one chance. We must take it. This is why we created the Renaissance Spirit, a platform dedicated to justice, equality, and the pursuit of knowledge. We explore history, politics, philosophy, and science, not just to understand the past, but to shape the future. If you believe in a world where technology serves humanity rather than enslaves it, subscribe, share, and join the fight. The Renaissance was an era of enlightenment, creativity, and resistance against oppression. It is time for a new Renaissance One that fights for justice, equality, and the future of all humankind. Live the Renaissance spirit!